Hello, welcome to a new edition of the Right Wing Populist Podcast. I am the Right Wing Populist. So, today I want to talk about how the anti Trump sentiment, the Trump hate, we're not just seeing on the left like we always do, but the hate we're even starting to see on some right wing commentators, particularly online, but even some mainstream outlets like Fox News. The Trump hate has gone a little bit out of control. Not from a left wing perspective, but from a right wing perspective. You're seeing people on the right who are questioning the Trump administration in its first year so far, placing doubts on whether or not Trump's keeping his campaign promises, whether or not the administration so far has been a success or not. And you're starting to see a push, and this is why we're seeing a divide now between the populist side and the establishment side. Partly it's over fight over control of the administration, but it's also having to do with 2028. And there are people like Ted Cruz who are clearly, I think, planning to angle themselves sort of against the Trump administration so they can run against J.D. Vance in the Republican primary in 28. And there was, I believe, an Axios article talking about how Ted Cruz is plotting a 28 run. I guess he's going to run as the Israel first candidate. I don't know how that's going to be successful, but I guess that's his plan. I don't think that's going to work. First off, Ted Cruz, when he was being interviewed by Tucker Carlson, said like either the number one or one of the main reasons he wanted to become a senator was to defend Israel. Okay, that just tells you everything you need to know about Ted Cruz. So I don't think Ted Cruz has a chance to become president. But the point is, there are people on the right who are not only angling or trying to undermine the Trump administration, they're doing so they can run against Trump's successor, J.D. Vance, because obviously Trump will not be able to run again. So this sort of leads us to the question of, like, what is the future of the Republican Party? And before we get into that, I think we have to go into how we got here with the Republican Party. So prior to Trump, Republicans had always been more of the business-friendly, more establishment party. They were the ones who represented the interest of the upper middle class, of the elites, you could even say. They were the party of Wall Street, dating back all the way to the 1960s. Obviously, there was an element of the party that also was racist, if we're being honest. George Wallace. But that was never really the main point of the Republican Party. Remember, the Democrat Party used to be the racist party. And there was not really a switch like the left-wing media likes to portray it, because most of the Democrat politicians who were pro-segregation, they didn't switch to Republicans, they stayed Democrats. But there's no doubt that the South switched from voting Democrat to voting Republican. But the reality is the Republican Party has always been the small business, the pro-market party, putting aside any social issues which change over years. The Republican Party fundamentally has been the free market party. And because of that, there has always been a natural alliance with Wall Street, with big money interests, with higher income people, sort of the country club establishment. That's where the saying comes from, the country club conservative. If you're free markets, your interests are going to sort of align with those type of people and organizations. And Reagan really sort of revolutionized the Republican Party, and he made free markets, popular. And you had working class people for the first time in years starting to vote Republican under Reagan. That's where the famous saying Reagan Democrats come from, because you had union workers in places like Macomb County who typically voted Democrat but would vote for Reagan because Reagan appealed to those type of voters. But once Reagan left, the working class voters, they went back to voting Democrat. That's how Bill Clinton won his elections in essentially landslides, what we consider to be a modern day landslide. Bush in 2000 and 2004 was able to win the presidencies, but he did it without working class voters. That's frankly why Bush was not able to win Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin, or even Iowa in one of the two campaigns, because he didn't appeal to the working class voters. But the Republican Party was still appealing to the elite, the Northern Virginia type of voter, let's say. But the problem for the Republican Party was that too began to shift. Because the Bush administration ended so poorly, and it became sort of the popular thing to be anti-Bush, anti-Republican, a lot of the college-educated voters who were becoming wealthy, they started to vote Democrat because they started voting for more of their social interests instead of their economic interests. Because, like I said, it was not popular to support Republicans. It's just the reality. So Obama in 2008, not only is he able to keep his vote with the working class people, he makes massive gains with higher income people. And that's why Obama was able to flip states like Colorado, Virginia, because he did really well in those wealthy suburbs in those states. And that's how Virginia, which used to be a rock rib Republican state, flipped to becoming a Democrat state. Same thing with Colorado. And in 2012, we see a little erosion with the working class vote for Obama. Obama does do a little bit worse with that demographic, but he does even a bit better, actually, with higher income voters. And Republicans, they're kind of screwed because if they've lost Virginia, they've lost Colorado, they've seemingly lost New Mexico and Nevada because of the Hispanic vote. And it's like, after 2012, Republicans, they think after they lose to Obama in 12 that the solution is to become softer on immigration. Brilliant idea, guys. But the Republican Party was lost. I mean, you can look this up. There were stories about how maybe Republicans would never win a national election again because the electoral map looks so onerous for Republicans going forward without states like Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico, etc. And the theory for the Democrats was, we'll be able to keep our vote with working class voters while making gains with higher income voters. So us taking big money from Wall Street's not a problem because those working class voters are never going to vote for Republicans. But then Trump comes along and changes everything. This cannot be emphasized enough. Trump's populism appealed to, particularly in 2016, white working class voters. And white working class voters were and still are disproportionately represented in the Electoral College. That's how Trump was able to win the 2016 election while losing the popular vote, because the type of demographic that he made major gains with, white working class voters, union voters, they were disproportionately represented in the swing states that determined the outcome of the election, particularly in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Remember, those three states hadn't voted for Republicans since the 1980s. Wisconsin hadn't voted for Republicans since 84. And Trump flipped all those three states, surprisingly. I mean, Hillary Clinton didn't even campaign in Wisconsin. That's how much she thought those three industrial states were locked up for her. They weren't. But it should be noted that those gains were only really with white working class voters. Democrats still did fine with minority working class voters, and they didn't make as much gains with higher income white voters as they expected, but they still made some gains. Then 2020 happens, and Trump actually does better with minority working class voters. He makes gains with Hispanics. This is sort of goes under the radar because Trump, quote unquote, loses the 2020 election. But you start to see not only are now white working class voters shifting to the Republican Party, but minority working class voters are also starting to transition. And in 24, that comes to a head where Trump makes massive gains with not just white working class voters, but working class voters of all ethnicities. He flat out wins Hispanic men in 24. He makes big gains with black working class men in 24, and you can see this in data from different counties, like in North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, where you have rural black majority counties or counties that have a disproportionate number of African Americans. Trump made gains, not by a ton, but there were certainly real gains there. So the 24 election shows that Trump had sort of created a multiracial working class coalition. mostly based off whether or not you have a 4-year degree or not. Education and class do tend to correlate, not entirely, but there does tend to be correlation there. And that's a problem for Democrats because there's still more working class people in this country than, white collar people. More people still don't have 4-year degrees than do have 4-year degrees. So, sort of the theory of the case, I thought, at least for Republicans going forward, is if we should expand this coalition, keep making gains with minority working class voters, and it makes the math very difficult for Democrats to win outside of, an electoral environment where there's a recession, where, that definitely changes the dynamics, regardless of the coalitions. But over this past year, Trump has been sort of distracted by establishment wish list policies. And what I mean by that is bombing Iran, doing whatever Israel wants, sort of not fully committing to getting us out of the Ukraine situation. The tariff policy has been used more to basically put sanctions on countries we don't like instead of being used for industrial policy. So you've started to see this clash between original MAGA from 2016 and the Republican establishment who wants to keep pushing Trump in a non-populist direction. So the question is, which way is the party going to go? Now, Trump can't run again. So this is really about J.D. Vance. In a lot of ways, J.D.'s more of a populist than Trump is. I did not say trumpet, by the way. I said Trump is. I saw a comment the other day about that. I just want to be clear. But Vance he's a total populist. There's no question about that. Whether you agree with him or not, you cannot deny that J.D. Vance, he comes from Appalachia. He represents Ohio, which is a big working class state. He understands, and he's, a veteran. So he served. So he understands the horror of war and why we need to focus on rebuilding America and not wasting all our money in these ridiculous foreign conflicts, like what we might be doing in Venezuela, by the way. It's looking more and more likely that Trump, again, he's going to go with what the establishment wants and try to do a coup in Venezuela. That's going to end up being a disaster. I hope Trump changes course last minute, but I'm not sure about that. But the question is, again, which direction should the party go in? And the obvious answer, it needs to keep going in the populist direction. The reason why voters are unhappy with Trump right now and why his approval rating is, it's sort of a misnomer. Trump is actually, his approval rating is what you would expect for a second-term president. It's actually, according to Real Clear Politics, his second-term approval is actually higher right now than it was when Obama was a year into his second term and Bush was a year into his second term. Now, that's not saying much. I think both those people were shitty presidents, but it just should be noted that Trump's approval rating is not that unusual. He's not historically unpopular, as I've started to see people claim. It's not true. But he's not that popular. He's under 45%. He's somewhere between 40 to 44%. And the reason is because he has not done enough to keep his populist promises. He wasn't elected because a bunch of young people and working class minority voters were converted to traditional conservatism. That's not why Trump won. Trump won because of his populist messaging, that he was going to fix inflation, that he was going to stop getting us entangled in ridiculous foreign conflicts, that he was going to bring back jobs through industrial policy like tariffs. I mean, he explicitly ran on tariffs. Whether you agree with Trump or not, he didn't hide the fact that he's a supporter of tariffs. So that's the message that got Trump elected the second time, his anti-establishment populist messaging. But now you have freaks like Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, Josh Hammer, Dave Rubin, people like Ted Cruz, Tom Cotton, the electeds, who clearly want to push the Republican Party back to the Bush-style party. But that would be a huge disaster because George W. Bush almost destroyed the Republican Party. The old Bush Republican Party couldn't appeal to working class voters, and it lost its appeal it had with white collar suburbanite voters. So if you go back to that, then it flips the other way. Then then Republicans don't have a mathematical way to win elections. That's why Obama won his 2 elections easily. So if you're just looking at the math, it's very obvious Republicans need to go in the populist direction. And the only way to make sure of that is to make sure J.D. Vance is the candidate. I will make this prediction right now, and I could be wrong, but I don't think so. If J.D. Vance is not the Republican nominee in 28, the 2028 election will not be close. The Democrat will win relatively easily. I mean, they're not going to win by 10. We're a divided country. But he'll get over 300, or she, whoever the Democrat candidate, will get over 300 electoral votes, and it won't be that close. They'll probably will sweep all the swing states like Trump did in this past election. It's very important J.D. Vance that's our only shot. Given the feel of the country, the weak economy, the unhappiness with voters, if we were to nominate someone like Ted Cruz, God forbid, the Republicans would be wiped out. All the gains Trump has made with working class voters of all ethnicities would be totally destroyed. The only demographic Ted Cruz might do a little bit better with is Jews, for obvious reasons. Other than that, he'd get destroyed. I don't care who the Democrat is. It could be AOC. AOC would be the president if she runs against Ted Cruz. So we can't go back to the Bush. And there's a report, another reason I bring this up, there is a report in Breitbart that the Bush family is going to try to, quote unquote, bring the Republican Party back to what it was, again, when they were the standard bearer, when Bush was the standard bearer. That would be a fucking disaster. I cannot emphasize this enough. George W. Bush was a terrible president. He nearly destroyed this country. He almost destroyed everything. The country, the Republican Party, my parents' marriage. That's a joke. If you're listening, Mom and Dad, that was a joke. I'm gonna get all like, what are you talking about marriage on your shitty podcast? Like, it's a joke. Calm down, Mom and Dad. I love you both. But Bush was not a good president. Now, I'm giving you an out. Bush was not a good president. I'm sorry. He almost destroyed everything. So we can't go back to that. Okay, we just can't. That'd be a disaster. So yeah, it's very important J.D. Vance is the nominee. Now, there could be, like, if DeSantis is sort of, I think, plotting about whether or not he should run again. It could be that Trump himself just clears the field in 28 and J.D. Vance is sort of the de facto nominee without even having to go through an actual primary. Although I think it would be good for Vance to go through a primary. In all honesty, I think that'd be good for him. So I'm not even sure I exactly want that. But like I said, I cannot emphasize this enough. The Republican Party needs to remain the populist party. Because without working class voters, the higher income, suburbanite, they're not coming back to the Republican Party. Just because of social issues alone, that's just not going to happen. Too many of those, your 4-year or post-grad degree voter, they are just not, they don't like social conservatism. Okay. They're fine with transgenderism. They love the gays. They think the gays are great. I love the gays too, but for different reasons. But they love the gays for like social reasons. So they're not coming back. Okay. We're not, the days of Republicans winning, suburban and exurban counties by like 30, 40 points, or even 50 points in some of these big counties in Texas or in the Bush years, that's not happening. Okay, those voters are gone. The problem, again, is it looks like Republicans might be starting to lose these working class voters. And again, if that happens, the Republican Party is going to be gone. So it has to be J.D. Vance. We have to stay in the populist direction. Because if we don't, we're cooked. Republicans will not win. We will not win the presidential election in 28. I'm guaranteeing you that. If JD's the candidate, presumably we'll be back on the populist messaging, so that's different. But anyone else, we're cooked. They don't even get me started on the midterms. I think regardless of what happens the next year, Democrats are going to win the House. I think Republicans will keep the Senate, but the House is cooked. So that's sort of my take about everything. I think sort of some of the Trump hate's a little bit out of control, but there are real problems. And we have to stop what is starting to clearly happen, the GOP establishment trying to take back the party from Trump. Because let's be honest, they don't say it now publicly, But the Republican establishment still has disdain for Trump. Okay. They did everything they could to stop Trump in 2016. And the only reason they couldn't is because Trump was such a force of personality, his charisma. He was able to fight back, unlike any other sort of insurgent candidate over the last 50, 60 years. I mean, Trump was a very unique figure. It's honestly incredible what he was able to pull off in 2016. Not only beating the Republican establishment, but beating the Democrats and the Clinton dynasty all in one election cycle. It was really incredible what he did. But now that Trump's, he's term limited and he's not going to be around for too much longer, the Republican establishment is going to try again to take the party back into the corporate whore party it used to be, and we cannot allow that to happen. We cannot allow that to happen. So that's it for today. Sorry this wasn't up on Thursday, but I wasn't feeling that well, so we had to delay it a day. But we'll be back tomorrow with the weekly wrap. Again, if I didn't say this at the beginning, please subscribe, whether on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, wherever the hell you listen or watch your podcast. I would greatly appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.